It is.
That is a good suggestion. Thanks, Jason.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that haven't met me, my name is Giles Claydon. I'm the Deputy Programme Manager on the programme. I've been here approximately 6 months, supporting Keith, and have been quite heavily involved in the in a lot of the round 3 replan activities. If we could go on to the first slide, please, Joe. Thank you. So I just want to make a couple of other introductions. First of all, to Jenny Booth from Ofgem, who in a minute is going to give us a brief sponsor message. And then I will hand over to Keith Clark, who I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, will know as the programme manager for MHHSP. And then just to go through the agenda, so we're going to kick off with the sponsor message from Jenny, and then I'm going to hand over to Keith to go through the round 3 objectives and an overall approach. And then it will come back to me, and I'll take about 10 minutes to talk through the high-level programme plan. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, each of the SME leads, to essentially talk through each of the programme phases, and each of the leads, just for the sake of time, will introduce themselves as they talk through each of their areas. That will hopefully lead us to about 5 minutes for a wrap up at the end. During the course of this afternoon or the next hour and a half, we will try and pause at various points to take questions as we go through the agenda. It's probably easy to talk to the materials in front of us as opposed to retrospectively have a big wash up at the end. So we'll try and manage that as we go through. What I would say is that if we are getting particularly bogged down in one area with lots of questions, we'll recognise that as we go through. But what I will ask is that we may either try and come back to it at the end, or use the email address that's also in the consultation to pick up any further questions we may not have an opportunity to pick up. The reason for that is I'm really keen that through the course of this afternoon that we give you a really good end-to-end overview of the plan and the rationale to help you in support of your sort of R3 round 3 thinking and responses. Just to draw attention as well, as some of you have probably seen on Teams, we are recording this, so that will be published on the collaboration site for the programme, along with the materials this afternoon. The majority of what we're going to show you is based on the implementation approach that was one of the round 3 artifacts. There have been a few amendments that we've made to that, which we will flag to you as we go through, and there's 1 or 2 additional elements as well to the presentation based on early feedback that we've had since mid-December, based on questions that we've received to date. Just as well, just draw your attention, at the end of this call you will get a link that says the recording is available. I'm afraid for most of you being external, it won't be available because it sits behind our firewalls. We will endeavour to put the recording up and the materials as quickly as we can over the next 24 hours, maybe sooner, after this call. So all the materials will be available on the collaboration portal. I think with that, if I may, I will go on to I'll hand over to you, Jenny, for a sponsor message from Ofgem.
Great, thanks, Giles. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jenny Booth. I'm the head of HHS at Ofgem. One of the things about this program, it is one of the arms that leads us to the overall objective of net zero. As such, there is a lot of interest in this program from BEIS, as they see this as an enabling program to underpin a number of their strategic programs, the key one being their flexibility approach and their smart energy approach. One of the things then that we are keen to get to is a robust and credible plan. part of that would be enabled by industry really utilising these sessions and in their responses providing quite granular and detailed information to the programme. A letter to that effect was sent out by Neil Lawrence, our Senior Director in Retail at Ofgem, to a number of chief executives, trying to encourage that level of engagement and getting the commitment for that level of engagement. The plan will eventually come to Ofgem to approve, and one of the things we will be doing is scrutinising the plan, looking for justification for timelines and deliverables, noting that, as I said, BEIS are very keen and interested in this program and are keen to actually see this implemented sooner rather than later. So, as it says here, you should work collaboratively with the program to get as much information as you can and actually utilize these sessions to get as much clarity as you can about the plan and how it's proposed to be implemented. Didn't want to add anything much more than that, and quite happy to answer any questions anyone might have, but the main tenet is please utilize these sessions and please send in the necessary information for the program to do what it needs to do to get a credible plan together. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. Are there any questions for Jenny before we move on? No, I think not. Okay. Okay. Now on to the round 3 objectives and approach. I'm going to hand over to Keith. Keith, over to you.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. So we won't cover too much of the top part of this slide. I think you already know we want to work with industry to get a realistic plan. So it's absolutely dependent upon getting good evidence and inputs from all of you in terms of the round 3 plan. The main objectives for the round 3 will be not only to consult on this plan, but also to gauge the status of your own activity in terms of DBT planning and actually progressing those plans. So in the consultation process, we will be asking for evidence of your DBT plans and timelines. This will help us detect where participants are in terms of the path along the critical path on the plan. And the other objective of round 3 is to gauge interest in SIT participation. We're already starting to get some good indications across the board from participants, including suppliers who may be interested in SIT, which is good to hear. But obviously we want to get both the DBT plans to underpin that, and secondly, get the responses. And we have asked for all round 3 responses by the end of January. And for those who are particularly interested in being involved in SIT, to reply by the 16th. But we do realise, and we've had some conversations with some participants who are keen to be in SIT, but will not be able to make the 16th. I would say that we are asking for people to put their best efforts into the responses. If it's a judgment call between getting the round 3 response back to us on the 16th and the 31st, but actually you need a bit more time to make those responses high quality and comprehensive, then we would prefer the latter. So yes, if you can get them back by the 16th, that would be great, because I think it does give you an indication of your readiness and being on the front foot to get this stuff done. But we would like the best quality responses that we can get as well. So that's what I would say about that one. Joe, could we move on to the next slide, please? The new artifact that we sent out with the documents was the implementation approach. As Giles says, from this document, we'll probably extract quite a lot of the content for today, but that gives you the helicopter view on the way the plan is put together and the overall thinking. We've put a lot more effort, and the artifacts underpinning that are much more granular. In round 1 and round 2, we were primarily getting you engaged on the plan and understanding some of the thinking around the plan. As we've gone through the round 1, round 2, round 3, we've tried to make sure that the kind of uncertainties and assumptions in the documents have been reducing. And at this stage, we still have quite a few assumptions. We have a lot more granularity and certainty than we had in previous rounds. But during this quarter, we would expect a lot of the detailed bottom-up thinking on things like how SIT will work, how qualification will work, to come out through the working group conversations that are happening. But actually, by the time we get to the end of this consultation process and come up with a rebaseline plan proposal, we'd like it to be based on the outputs of the working groups and the consensus of the experts in those working groups, which would give us a much more solidity to the plan. But obviously there will still be some areas of uncertainty even at that stage, but we're hoping that the rebaseline plan will have a lot less uncertainty in it than previous incarnations of the plan. So please do respond to the consultation. It is something that's expected in your obligations to do that. We will be reporting back to PSG on who has and hasn't replied to the consultation. And as I say, we'll try to make sure this plan is a working group led plan as we go through, but the inputs that you give us at this stage will really help us drive those working group discussions as well. It's a kind of an iterative relationship between governance and the working groups and the plan. But by the end of this process, which is end of March, we should be in a place where the policy making through working groups and the plan itself are aligned and represent the latest state of the art in terms of our consensus about how we're going to deliver this programme. Okay, Giles, that's it from me.
Okay, thanks, Keith. So before we go into the each of the individual areas of the programme, I thought it'd be really useful just to provide an overview of the plan from a high level perspective, just to give you an appreciation as to how each of the key phases fit together and the interrelationship between them. So this plan that you're seeing here is a slightly modified plan from the one that was in the implementation approach. And just to draw out just two or three of the changes before I go into some of the detail here and just draw out some of the key parts of the plan. If you look in the milestone box at the top, just a couple of corrections here that we have updated this just to show that the migration window is 18 months, not a year. That was an error in the original that went out in December. Although we did actually specify the correct dates in the chart but below it, but just for consistency, just want to make sure that you're aware of that so it doesn't cause any confusion. So that's M11 and M12 milestones at the top. We also had an error against the critical path 3, CP3. That originally said July 25. We've now changed that to September 25. And probably the most significant change, and this isn't the plan because it was in the detail of the Microsoft project plan that went out, but we've just elevated this to a higher level given some of the focus. You'll see in the middle of the plan there is a off-red burgundy type narrow swim lane that covers non-SIT LDSO testing, which is pre-migration testing for LDSOs. And in the box on the right, it's probably fairly tricky to read through a Teams call, but there is a more detailed narrative and explanation around that, and I'll talk a little bit to that in a minute. So just to give an overview across the plan, we've tried to show on here three critical paths for different groups of participants depending on how they enter the program. The first and fastest critical path, which is designated actually by CP2, which is the bolder dashed line on the left. This reflects the fastest path to migration, and that will actually and that's really relevant to the SIT participants that essentially form what we have termed, and you've probably seen this through various working groups that you've been on, the minimum viable cohorts. So that is the essential mix, minimum mix and composition of participants needed to prove the overall core design as a key input to us establishing the US environment needed for qualification. So that is the fastest path through the program because it requires those participants to test sooner. But the main benefit of going through SIT to those participants is that they will reach migration sooner as well, and therefore potentially enjoy some first mover, early adopter advantage when it comes to comes through to hitting migration sooner and enabling some of the newer tariffs that are underpinned by the half-hourly settlement. So that's the fastest route through the program based on SIT entry. The next critical path, which is the finer dashed line in the middle, represents the alternative mode of entering the program, which is based on qualification. And what you see here is the path that the first tranche of those participants through qualification would take should they be ahead in their DBT and able to go into qualification sooner. Important to note that elapsed time, we think that's about on the current assumptions, which we will talk about more as we go through this afternoon. That is about six to 8 months. So there is an advantage to electing for SIT if your organisation is interested and your DBT timelines permit. The final critical path on here, the one on the right here, which is the solid red line. This shows the path that a participant would take if they're in the final tranche of qualification. We have several tranches that make up the qualification path, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And essentially, as the last tranche to roll off qualification, they will be the last to enter migration. And that red line there, to the purists amongst you, actually represents the full program critical path, because that then leads on into being ready for leads into the completion of migration, and then into the new settlement code becoming live in 2027, which is obviously the ultimate sort of objective for the program. So those are the three critical paths. To just step you through each of the phases at a very high level that we'll elaborate more on as we go through this afternoon. In the grey swim lane at the top is effectively where we are, where our main focus is at the moment. And there is a lot of focus going on amidst our central parties, the 5 central parties, to work through and work up their design, build, and ultimately test phase, which culminates in PIT at the end of that stage, which is the exit into SIT. So the focus is on those 5 central parties. That will be expanded as a result of the round 3 consultation, which as you're aware from Keith's update, is very much focused in on identifying participants that are keen to participate in SIT. And once those participants have come forward, they will also be part of that same SI quality assurance as well. And indeed, they will need to complete PIT as well in order to enter into the first stage of the next swim lane down, which is the sort of the yellow amber one in there, which is covers several different cycles and stages through SIT, which Dom will talk to in more detail. I'm not going to go through each of those cycles. The first stage of that is component integration, which marks sort of the starting gun of the SIT in terms of SIT testing, and then that leads into full functional testing, SIT functional testing, to prove the design, the core central design. The critical path follows that route because it's really key that we get to the end of the SIT functional stage as quickly and as smoothly as possible. Because once we've achieved that, we've then proven the environment that we need to stand up for the remaining non-SIT participants to test through the qualification route. So you can see that the critical path follows sort of vertically down from that stage down into qualification as a dependency. Now, as I possibly mentioned at the start, or if I didn't, I meant to. If a participant goes through SIT, the main advantage is that you wouldn't have to enter into qualification, because SIT is seen as an equivalent to the actual testing that takes place in qualification, with one exception, and that is the SAD process, the self-assessment document process, which is just that. It's self-assessment, but it covers off wider back-end systems and business processes. So that's really the advantage that SIT offers. Qualification is comprised of a year-long window, which is broadly in line with the timescales that we had in round 2. The working assumption around qualification is that we will have seven tranches that will sit within the qualification process, but an additional 2 months shrouded around the front and back end of each of those tranches in order to provide sufficient time for the governance, which needs to sit in that area. And that is the code body governance, as they are the ones that actually control the qualification path and indeed standards that need to be met. Qualification is based on planning assumptions from our side. It's probably one key area of this plan where actually we are slightly at arm's length, because the code bodies have a degree of independence about this. But certainly the working assumptions that we have in the plan at the moment have been discussed, and the code bodies are very much aware of what we've set out here. So that's qualification. You may have noticed I missed the narrow swim lane in Burgundy in there. That was on purpose. We have drawn this out, as I mentioned at the start, against the implementation approach, the plan, so I should say, in the implementation approach that you've seen in December. The reason for that is that we wanted to absolutely recognise and give more prominence to the fact that all LDSOs do need to pass testing that provides the equivalence of qualification before that first MVC goes live. And there is a real constraint and need for all LDSOs to pass that nationally as a precursor for the MVC cohort that I mentioned just now to go live at the start. And that's a key piece of testing that we need to do to get to get all those through as entry to migration. Moving on further down, we've got the regulatory co-drafting aspects. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. As the schematic here, or this high-level plan implies, there is it's not on the critical path by the gaps between some of the phases. I think the most critical activity on here, just to call out, is the need and the recognition on the programme that we need to lock all code changes in prior to going live at the start of migration. So that's quite a sort of a key dependency. Migration, as you see there in the sort of the navy blue line, and ultimately from the bottom, there is a difference on this. At round 2, we had provisionally estimated that we thought that this phase would take 12 months. We have actually, due to some modelling that Aid will come on to as we go through the next sections, we've actually extended that to 18 months. We think that with some of the assumptions that we are now making based on emerging information, that we need to extend that out. So the whole window for migration is 18 months from April 2025. The remaining window there is represented at 12 months, and we'll continue to refine those assumptions as we go forward. But I think there is now a strong contention that we believe that is a sensible window to progress all the MPANs through migration. The final step in the process is going into live. We have at least a 2-month gap between the migration being complete and moving over to the new settlement code. As Jason will explain later, that's principally about stabilizing all the systems before we finally make that final switch over to the new code in 2027. I think I've covered everything I want to here. I'm just going to pause and ask if there are any questions. No? Okay. With that, then I think we will move in and move on to the each of the phases. So we're going to kick off with design, build, and test, and I will hand over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Pettit. I head up the LDPSI design team. Before, obviously, we're in the phase of design, build, test. The bit that we're focusing on here for the next couple of minutes is about the design and about supporting you in your design and the readiness for getting into pit and sit. To that end, I assume most of you are aware that the design is going to DAG for approval and final sign-off on the 1st of February. Following that, what's going to happen is the design artifacts will be uploaded to the collaboration base on the 8th of February. In parallel to that, we'll be providing augmenting that design with a number of artifacts that extend the views and to basically really to assist you in identifying which parts of the design are pertinent to you as an individual, whether you be a supplier, LDSO, etc. So we've got that process, and that again will be launched on the collaboration base on the 8th of February. As part of the readiness, we're going to be doing in the past, as part of the program, we've been doing design assurance. We'll be moving that into participant design assurance, and it's really nothing to worry about. It's basically there to assist you, so we can get a view. We want everybody to succeed through their sit testing. To that end, so we're going to be forming an independent review, working with you to understand, to make sure that things like you understand that you've correctly identified your business processes, the interfaces within the TOM, etc., and supporting you through that process, but also to give the wider program a view of readiness of people going into sit and pit. As we said, we want everybody to succeed through these testing phases. We'll be issuing some guidance documentation very soon, probably in February, just to basically cover out what that is. In the meantime, I think we talked to several parties already. We use the design mailbox. That's going to endure, and basically we'll support you through any clarifications, questions, etc. that you have through that design at mhhprogram.co.uk mailbox. So yeah, really, we're here to help you and get you through this process. What I'll do now is hand over to Nigel, who will take you through the DBT1 and DBT2 phases of that. But if there's any questions, happy to answer those. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, my name is Nigel Hunt. I work in the testing area in the SI. I'm going to talk you through the testing part of DBT. So DBT, it's formed into two parts, DBT1 and DBT2. DBT1 are the sort of key requirements and interfaces testing which will need to be completed by all participants, whether they go through SIT work stream or qualification testing. And it's a precursor from a SIT perspective for CIT and entry into SIT. So basically, I say it covers SIT or qualification. It's the responsibility of all participants to do this, but we will be, as an SI, providing a pre-qualification guidance document at the end of this month that will support the process required here and the assurance that we or the code delivery bodies through qualification will support you with. DBT2. This is the back-end systems and consequential change. That is not required as an entry into to SIT, but will be required to be completed prior to, or by the end of qualification, prior to going to migration. Joe, could you move to the next slide, please? So I'll give some details of what PIT is. So PIT is itself, obviously, it's the last part of DBT. So as Paul alludes to earlier, there's the assurance of the requirements, and then there's a build, and we will support from a SIP swim lane or qualification from a qualification code delivery body, sorry, from a qualification perspective, the assurance of that, and allowing us to go into the integrated testing phases. So PIT needs to be just going through the bottom. PIT requires to be non-functional, functional, and any regression required as part of the end of your testing phases. And again, in line with the requirements from the RTM that Paul's going to support with the assurance of, and support your understanding of that. PIT is a responsibility of each individual party, and that includes the systems, the test environments, test data, the scenarios and scripts, your own test processes, whatever those are, and whatever methodologies you use, your test management tool, and associated defect management process. What we shall do as a program, and again, I'm talking about from a SIP perspective and qualification, we will provide the assurance of your test artifacts, which is the approach and test plan. It says here the requirements traceability matrix. Just to let you know, that means the requirements test traceability matrix, as opposed to RTM that Paul was talking about earlier. We will assure your PIT scenarios and test scripts. We will be expecting a regular execution progress report, and finally, and importantly, the PIT test completion report. More detail of those and what's required in those, and how we ensure that will be provided in the PIT guidance document, which is said is coming out at the end of the month. That was it from a PIT perspective. Have you got any questions you'd like to put to me? If not, thank you very much.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Nigel. Dom, over to you for SIT.
Thanks, Giles. Afternoon, everybody. My name's Dominic Mooney. I'm the SIT lead on the programme. For those of you that I haven't met, I'd encourage everyone to join the SIT working group if you're intending to volunteer for SIT. But anyway, in terms of an overview, the systems integration testing is going to involve two core elements. As Nigel mentioned, evidence of pre-integration testing carried out in participants' own environments, and this will prove specific functional, non-functional, migration-related characteristics of the systems. For those undertaking SIT, I won't go into any more detail that Nigel's just covered, but essentially we'll be looking for test approach and plan, RTM scenarios and scripts, which will all be assured. And then the second component of the SIT is the actual execution itself, and that will be demonstrating functional, non-functional, and migration-related characteristics in an integrated environment in SIT. So along with the actual PIT evidence, participants are also going to be expected to demonstrate test environment network connectivity prior to the commencement of CIT. And also for more detailed test steps associated to the scenarios and scripts that are going to be developed by the programme. And during SIT execution, the execution will be carried out via the programme's test management tool, which is ADO. The SI will be assuring test readiness for SIT entrance. So that will be evidence of the PIT testing. I mentioned the environments and the test steps, but also any data that's being allocated and loaded and verified in environments as well. We'll be providing a test approach and plan for each test stage within SIT, and this will be developed and validated through the SIT working group. There will also be a test stage associated test data approach and plan. I mentioned the scenarios and scripts and verifying the PIT testing, and then during the execution itself, the SI will also be assuring test execution results. In addition to that, we'll also be ensuring the availability of the relevant test harnesses, test environments, and I mentioned the data against which each participant is going to be running their testing against. And then during the execution, we'll be managing the SIT process and schedule. And ahead of that, we'll be providing access and training to the test management tool. And we'll be providing overall defect and issue management for all the centrally raised issues, including their triage, and that will also involve environment management defects as well. So the associated deliverables that we'll be producing are test stage approaches and plans and associated test data approach and plans. We'll be asking participants to also provide us with a test readiness report, and we'll be then aggregating that into an overarching SIT stage readiness report as well. And then following execution, there'll be an overarching SIT stage completion report. And alongside that, we'll be providing a defect management plan and test management tool user guidance document. Joe, if you don't mind moving us forward. So central to the approach for SIT is going to be the establishment of a minimum viable cohort. This is a programme construct, but essentially we're asking for participants to provide their intention to volunteer for SIT. But when we actually get into the execution, what we'll be looking to do is form the minimum group of SIT participants that are needed in order to be able to exercise the full SIT coverage. The reason we're doing that is obviously to accelerate the plan as much as we can, but we will also be supporting other SIT participants who are not within that MVC for a longer period of time within the environment, and it still provides an opportunity for those that are going to be involved in SIT to actually get into migration and to market quicker. So the purpose of SIT is to demonstrate that the MHHS arrangements function correctly and have been implemented in accordance with the design. And as I say, the MVC will enable us to reach that test objective as quickly as possible. Within the MVC, we'll be expecting all of the central systems to be there. We'll need at least one of the St. Clement's IDNOs providing MPRS, the IDNOs providing network operations services and UMSO services, and also supplier agents. And then we'll also be looking for at least two of the different service provider types and two suppliers. As I say, it's not limited to that grouping. The MVC will be something that we'll monitor in the early stages of SIT functional testing, and then we'll seek to prioritise the test objectives of the MVC within the schedule. But alongside that, we will also support other SIT participants in order to complete their test coverage. On the right-hand side, there's a number of assumptions and principles that we've built into the plan. But based on feedback, I'm just going to flip to the next slide, which is supplementary, just to talk you through the various steps in terms of onboarding into SIT. So we've mentioned the milestone where we're asking all participants to come back and inform us of their intention to volunteer for SIT, ideally by the 16th, but if you're not in a position until the 31st of January, then that's fine. You'll still be considered for participation in SIT. There'll then be a period where the programme assures delivery plans, and we'll be looking to agree the SIT candidates by the 23rd of April. Again, at this stage, there'll be no distinction made between the MVC and other SIT participants. And then we'll be looking to integrate all participants into SIT CIT. The SIT CIT stage, that will be first the DIP and then Helix and then MPRS if possible, and then other roles progressively integrated at 2-week intervals during that SIT CIT stage. Now, ahead of that, we are also asking participants to be in a position to stand up their environments and perform some basic connectivity testing and prove that their certificates are in place. And all working successfully, and that is really to de-risk the SIT CIT phase, where we'll be more focused on basic testing of the interfaces ahead of the SIT functional testing stage. Once we've exited SIT CIT, we're not looking to add any further participants into SIT. So as I said, there'll be 2-week intervals. So the last entrance will be the end of SIT CIT minus 2 weeks, which is the 29th of Jan. That said, we're looking for a progressive integration approach of different role types, as I mentioned, which we're developing via the SIT working group. And so we will confirm that sequence within the working group, and we'll be looking to align participants to that sequence. Once we start the SIT functional, the MVC will be based on the composition that I described, and obviously we'll be monitoring the progress and looking for the highest number of tests successfully executed, and those with the lowest number of defects as well. And we'll then continue to maintain that MVC, and we'll be doing periodic reviews during the execution. And there may be a certain amount of dynamism about that MVC cohort. So if certain participants do start to fall behind within the MVC and other participants are working at pace, then we may look to change some of the participants comprised in the MVC. As I mentioned, in order to be able to reach our test coverage objectives, on any given day, we'll be prioritising the objectives of the MVC, and this will become particularly important during the non-functional test stages. So the migration testing, the NFT, and the operational testing, which we're planning to carry out in a separate environment to the functional testing, and so we're recommending that all participants are starting all of the stages from functional testing onwards at the same time, so that we can mitigate all participants being able to complete their test coverage within the window. Just to note, any SIT participant that does drop out of SIT testing would then need to proceed via the non-SIT route, so via qualification. However, we have been speaking with the code delivery bodies about how some credit will obviously be applied to any execution that has been carried out in the SIT phase. But yeah, that's just a point to note. So if there's no questions, I'm just going to move on to a POAP view. So
I might just pause before you move swiftly on, Dom. I might just pause there and just ask the groups. We've covered quite a lot of material there, partly in quite a sort of a textual form. Are there any questions? I mean, I'll probably just in other groups we've had quite a lot of discussion about this, and I just want to make sure that there's every opportunity at this stage just to ask questions, because clearly it's probably this is absolutely key, I think, to probably many organisations, and be able to make a clear choice between whether you're potentially going to go down through electing for the SIT route versus the qualification route. So I'm very keen that we do answer all the questions you might have. Lad, could I just put you on the spot potentially, just as the rep? Are there any sort of specific questions that are coming to mind at the moment for you, or do you want to hold off till we've been through this final part?
Nothing from me at this stage. But yeah, if I think of anything, I'll let you guys know. Also, no questions came through from any of my contacts. So I'm not sure if maybe they'll address these directly with you. But they haven't come to me with it.
Okay. All right. I don't see any other hands up, but again, if there are questions, please just raise a hand and we'll stop and pause and pick them up. Dom, I think back to you.
Okay, thanks, Charles. So on the POAP here, on the left-hand side, you can see the different stages of SIT testing. So we've got SIT CIT, functional, migration, NFT, and operations. At the top there, we've got the SIT CIT test execution phase. So ahead of that, all readiness activity will need to be complete in terms of environment connectivity, PIC completion, test data, and so on. And then during that window, as I say, we'll be looking to progressively integrate participants into CIT with the aim of commencing SIT functional testing from the 27th of February 24. As I mentioned, there's no distinction at the beginning of that testing between the MVC and other SIT participants, but we'll be seeking to, as I say, run to the pace of the fastest once we form that MVC. And then the functional testing itself is broken down into 3 cycles. And the intention of the first cycle is to execute as much of the solution coverage as possible, obviously acknowledging that there may be some defects that are uncovered during that phase. And then a further 2 cycles where we would address any residual defects, run any associated targeted regression testing, and then looking to actually get to a point by the 21st of October 24, where we've established enough confidence to implement a code freeze for the central systems. And related to that, in the other testing stages, we've got the SIT migration stage as the first stage that's being carried out in SIT B. A lot of that testing is going to be functional in nature, and so we're prioritizing that in order to achieve that code freeze milestone there. Subsequent to that, we'll run through a regression testing phase, and then there's a milestone of SIT functional end for the MVC, which is targeted for the 3rd of January 25. And then there'll be a continued period for other participants outside of the MVC, where you'll be continued to be supported within the environment and the support framework up until the 7th of April 25. Just on the right-hand top corner there's a table that shows the environments that are going to be used for SIT testing. So the first and primary environment is going to be SIT A. That's going to be used to support the CIT and functional test phases. We're looking to have that environment up and in place for the start of SIT CIT. There's a second environment there, which is SIT staging, which is going to be supporting functional testing. The intention of that environment is to run any defect retesting in an integrated environment, mainly targeted on the core and central systems, and any associated regression testing, so that we can gain confidence in those builds before we deploy them into the main SIT A environment. So that environment, when we're getting into the functional testing, there'll obviously be more richness in the coverage that we're executing from the start of that phase, and so we're asking for that environment to be up and running in line with the start of that stage. And then there's SIT B, where we're going to be running the migration, non-functional and operational testing stages, and we've aligned the environment requirement there to be available for the start of the migration testing. As you can see, there's an element of overlap currently in the plan between the end of migration and the start of SIT NFT, and with the NFT and SIT ops, and we're expecting to manage that via scheduling within the environment, because obviously some of those testing objectives are going to be exclusive, mutually exclusive on a given day. But this will be further refined within the SIT working groups, and we'll be looking to establish the full scope of what those test phases are. And then at the bottom of the POAP there, we've got the non-SIT testing, just to show how that relates. So we mentioned earlier about the non-SIT LDSO testing. So that's been brought forward since round 2, because we now know that we need to have that qualification equivalent testing for non-SIT LDSOs completed in time for M10 and M11. So that will be running in parallel with the later stages of SIT. And then we've got the UIT test phase, which involves end-to-end sandbox and qualification testing. So the trigger point for starting end-to-end sandbox testing will be the core systems code freeze. And the trigger point for qualification execution start will be once we've concluded the functional testing for the MVC, and sufficiently completed SIT migration, NFT, and operational testing for the MVC. So unless there's any questions relating to that, I think I can hand back to you, Giles.
Okay, thanks, Dom. I'm going to just pause there again for any questions. There's quite a lot of content in there, so I'm just going to give everybody a chance to put a hand up if needs be. Okay, I don't think there are. Jason, I think over to you for qualification, please.
Okay, great. Thank you, Giles. And I will hopefully build on some of the points that that Dom has talked through on SIT and explain. Maybe one of the things that be valuable today is to maybe got a bit more time than we've had on some other sessions. So just explain what's required for qualification and how it relates and what the differences are with the SIT execution. So qualification is a key step for the programme and for the enduring code bodies, because what qualification does is it provides confidence to those code bodies that parties who are going to operate in the MHHS arrangements are tested and robust and will not disrupt the market before coming in to operate. So qualification is a well-established principle within the industry. The difference that we've got here for MHHS is that we've got a new set of participants, a new set of functions and processes, a new set of settlement processes. That means that we need to undertake a set of tests to prove that those new roles and systems and services work, as opposed to the current arrangements for qualification, which tend to be done around a risk assessment, because they tend to be they tend to be assessed for change and modifications that are coming into the existing code. So this is a quantum step with a new set of arrangements, and therefore we are looking to do testing. So there are 4 elements to qualification in here, and again I'll try and relate it back to SIT, because what we're asking for in the Replan consultation is we're asking for people to provide their DBT plans. So we want your plans, and so it's and we're asking for those participants who might be considering SIT to let us know as part of the Plan 3 consultation response. So I think it's quite important for you to understand the difference between them. And it's not just around timing, it is around content as well. So the 4 elements of qualification is, the first is a procedural and governance element. So there is a self-assessment document that is currently assessed by Alexon, and we will be tailoring that self-assessment document to cover the MHHS arrangements. So that is going through the documentation, what it means for you to join the balancing and settlement code under as a new participant in MHHS. We have an entry criterion for qualification, which is providing the DBT1 pre-integration testing evidence in the same way that Dom described for SIT. So that is the same. We will need that evidence of PIT so that we have confidence that you have done your system testing and you're in a fit state to enter into our SIT. And what that does is it should reduce the number of defects that we find during our SIT testing, because we're getting some confidence that you have already tested your systems. For qualification, we are also asking for evidence of DBT2 testing, and this particularly applies to suppliers where there is consequential change. And this is a lesson learnt from the switching program and other industry initiatives. So in the switching program, there was quite a lot of consequential change that required updates to supplier systems and processes that weren't directly related to MHHS design and related to our design artifacts, but they're important for delivering the program as a whole, and in our instance, MHHS. So we are progressing through the working groups, again, as Keith said right at the beginning, what evidence we might require for your testing of that consequential change, so that we can have confidence that the arrangements as a whole will fit together and operate robustly in the market. That's not an entry criterion into qualification. That's part of the evidence we'll be asking for as part of qualification. So that will be part of the tick boxes we'll require in the self-assessment document. And the fourth element of this is the actual testing itself for qualification. And what we're expecting in qualification testing, when Dom's talking about the SIT testing is in order to prove our design, and we'll be undertaking a set of end-to-end tests as part of SIT that proves the processes work from an end-to-end perspective to match with our design. For example, change of supplier activity all the way through registration, all the way through appointment of service providers, and potentially connecting and collecting data from smart meters. For qualification, we're not taking that end-to-end view. We're looking at testing on a role-by-role basis because we're qualifying you as in your roles. So as a supplier, we'll be qualifying you as a supplier. If you have service providers for smart data services, we will be qualifying those smart data service providers, advanced data service providers, and so on. So the qualification testing will be similar to SIT. It will likely to be an extract of the SIT testing. But if you think of the roles, we'll put a boundary around those roles, and we'll look to execute testing that is relevant and applicable for those roles rather than the end-to-end. So that's what we're expecting to be the scope of qualification testing. It's likely to be a subset of SIT coverage because of that. In the end-to-end tests, we're likely to test similar processes a number of times because they may fit into different end-to-end test scenarios. But in qualification, we will seek to execute the testing of those functions, processes, and systems on the basis of functional coverage rather than end-to-end coverage. So I hope that explains. I've had the chance to go into a bit more detail on the content of qualification, because I think it's important that you understand what will be required of you in qualification and how it relates to SIT, because as I say, we want to encourage suppliers to respond as to whether they're going to participate in SIT. In the POAP that Giles ran through, and Adrian will talk about migration in a bit. There is a significant advantage of going through SIT because you can start your migration activities much earlier than if you go through qualification. So in Giles's POAP at the beginning, there's 6 months difference in the migration window from starting from qualification to starting from SIT. So there's a real opportunity to migrate your MPANs earlier and start to offer products and services off the back of MHHS to your customers. On responsibilities, importantly, the code delivery bodies are going to be responsible for qualification, and that's right, because it's their performance assurance boards that sign off the suitability of participants to come into the market. We are expecting the code bodies to pick up the material that we're developing for SIT that Dom talked through earlier as part of that. And we will continue to provide the test harnesses, test environments, some of the test management tools that we will use in SIT. So we won't be reinventing the wheel. We'll be making use of the assets that we've developed through the SIT preparation activities. I think I think that does this slide, Joe. Any questions from anyone around the content of qualification? Anything to tease out around that you might want to know about what's in SIT, what's in qualification, how you might make your decision as to whether you're going to participate in SIT, and any other sort of information you want to help build your DBT plans? Doing our best to try and encourage some questions, but I'm perfectly happy for anyone who sort of digests this, come away and think of other questions. Please do follow up with questions afterwards, because there is quite a lot of content to digest. So on the timescales, thank you, Joe. The qualification activities are in the light blue chevrons in the middle. We have started our qualification testing preparation, as you can see in there, and the first deliverable for that is the test approach and plan, and we'll continue. There's a whole load of preparation activities that sit in the more detailed Microsoft project plan. We will continue those preparation activities through into 2025 in advance of and in parallel with the early qualification execution window. We've got the SAD process that I talked about, that self-assessment documentation. We've got that running from April 2024, which is when the code drafting will be complete for qualification. So we will have that baselined code drafting, so we know what Elexon and Retco and others will need to do for the SAD. And then we've got the qualification testing execution itself running in that bar from January 25 to March 26. It's a 12-month window that we've set aside for qualification testing execution, and then a 2-month window for PAB approval and for mobilization of production environments to enable you to start the actual migration activities themselves. So that's what that red line critical path is that Giles talked through so eloquently earlier on. The 12 months is an estimate at the moment. We are talking to Elexon as to whether that is a practical timeline. The way that we have assumed it runs at the moment is that each qualification testing tranche takes 6 months. We do it on a monthly cycle to align with the PAB meetings, and that gives us 7 tranches of qualification that will run within that 12-month window. So that's the timeline that we've got in there, and that is subject to discussion with Elexon. Obviously, they need to have confidence that they can execute qualification in that timeline. Next slide, Joe. I think that's me done. Yeah, shall I just pause again, see if there's any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. If we end up in Trans 7,
yeah.
How long do we have to complete migration? It looks like we don't have very long at all.
That is, well, I think it's 8 months. I'll have to go back and have a look at the POAP. Hang on 1 second. It is from yes. So if I go back to the POAP, it's that last red line. Joe, I don't know if you can go back to the POAP, can you? Sorry, Matthew, we just flicked through a lot of material here. Yeah, so it's that last red line is the last tranche of qualification testing. So that then that I think that's 8 months at the end of the window.
January to October is what that is.
Yes.
So I was just reading
10 months. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks, Giles.
Okay,
So,
good. But cool.
Yeah, so
I think we misunderstood something when we were looking the other day. But yeah, 8 months is fine.
Yeah, it's really good. This is exactly why we want to do these sessions, Matthew. So that's exactly the sort of question we want to tease out. So and when Aid comes to talk about the migration, you know, we have assumed a certain profile of migration, and obviously you'll need to have when you're looking at your planning activities. I would expect you will look to have confidence that you can migrate all of your MPANs in the window that you're setting aside. Depending on when you're planning to come through either qualification or SIT.
We did have another question. Is there a way to finish qualification earlier than the red line so that we can start migration earlier, or is it fixed?
It's not fixed. So as long as you complete the 4 elements of qualification, then you'll be able to be submitted to PAB. At the moment, we're assuming that will take 6 months in a tranche. If you can get all your self-assessment documentation ready, if you can get your DBT2 testing evidence, and you can execute the qualification tests quicker than that 6 months, then I see no reason why you shouldn't be submitted to PAB on that basis. As long as you've ticked all the boxes and got all the evidence for qualification, then you should be able to go to PAB.
Yeah, we support multiple medium-size and large suppliers, so we're thinking that by the time we get to Trans 7, we should be experienced in getting them through this.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we've been looking at, and it's important for you guys to continue to attend the SIT working group and the qualification working group, because what we've been looking at is equivalence as well. So if you've been through, and I think you're from NSEC, aren't you, Matthew?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone
So
was mentioning this. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you've been through a set of tests with one of your customers and you've proven functionality of your software, if it's the same version, then we are looking at whether we can take some equivalence of that through testing. So that is something we're looking at. It's something we'll progress through the working groups. It hasn't been pinned down exactly yet, Matthew, but it is something that we're looking at. And again, I'll re-emphasize Keith's point at the beginning. This plan at the moment is a snapshot with the best information we've got. We are developing these arrangements all the time through the working groups. So your input into the working groups is essential. We've got some assumptions that underpin it, and we're revising those through the working groups.
Cool, thank you.
Sorry to flick back, Joe. Thank you. Yeah, the next slot is also mine, so apologies for keeping talking, everyone. But there's also a set of activities in the plan around code drafting. Once we have already started our code drafting activities, and there are a set of planned activities set out to deliver all the drafting that's required for the balancing settlement code, the retail energy code, DCUSA and CUSC to deliver the MHHS changes. This was in the previous iteration of the plan, set out in a set of topics that I'll cover a bit later. There is one change in round 3 that wasn't in round 2. And that is off the back of change request 12, CR12, which brought this code drafting for consequential change into the scope of the programme. So we've now included additional activities in our plan for consequential change that weren't in there originally. What that does for industry is it gives you one consistent, coherent set of code changes for consequential change and direct change for MHHS. And the code bodies are largely delivering the drafting. The programme is delivering the BSc drafting. So Joe, if you move on to the next slide, please. This shows the new topic area, consequential change, which is row I in here. That has pushed back M6 by a couple of months, which is M6 is where we've got all the code drafting finalised, but that isn't on the critical path, so it doesn't have an impact on the overall programme. The key dependency that follows the finalisation of the code drafting is the start of the qualification self-assessment documentation. So we're allowing people to start that as soon as possible, and the time in which they can start that is when we've baselined the code drafting. So if we move on, Joe, this is something that we have shared with people a number of times before, so I'm hoping it's not new, but this is just a typical development life cycle for the code drafting topics. And Joe, if you move on, I think that's it from me. Any last questions before I hand over to Aid? I don't mind going back to qualification or code drafting. Any questions?
No, I think no. I can't see any hands up. Jason, thank you.
Okay.
Aid, I think over to you.
Okay, afternoon everybody. For those that don't know me, my name's Adrian Page, known as Aid on the programme. I'm the SI lead on the half-hourly programme. And what I wanted to do this afternoon is just talk through the migration activities and some of the go-live activities to complete the plan on a page. I'm not going to read this word for word because it's as per the implementation approach, but having completed either the SIT route or the qualification route, energy suppliers are in that position to start migrating their NPANs. What we've done is outlined the approach here in the implementation approach. But what I would draw your attention to is the 2 groups that we're using to develop this. So bottom right, we've referenced the migration design subgroup, So this group is looking at the design for migration and commenced October, November last year and is due to complete under Q1 this year. And that will include the reverse migration decision that was made at PSG at the end of last year. This group has been led by John Wiggins, and they had their last meeting they had actually was yesterday. So if you haven't already plugged into that, I would encourage that to make sure you understand that the migration design. The other group that sits in parallel with this at the moment is the migration working group, which has been led by Kylie Ward to date, and John's going to be leading that one as well going forward. We've got that one starting in 15 minutes at 3 o'clock today. And in that meeting group, we're looking at the overall migration approach and the strategy, how some of the business processes will work, and we're developing that in conjunction with the membership there. What we're also doing at that group is looking at the data. So we're doing a data assessment report. So all the various data fields that are required to enable the clean data to be in place to migrate meters, where that comes from, who the data owner is, and a good few years of experience in the industry tells me that the quality of that data in some cases will be very high, in some cases won't be so high, so there'll be some data cleansing that will need to be done by the industry as a whole, and how we in the programme will then track the dependency on that activity happening. So we're going to discuss that. In fact, that's one of the main agenda items this afternoon. And the other thing we're doing in that group, if we just flick forward one slide, please, Joe, is looking at that migration model. And it was this that we used to determine that the length for migration that was 12 months in the plan, we've extended to 18 months. There's an Excel spreadsheet that we've developed that sits behind this, but broadly speaking for the call here, 3 stages to migration, fairly standard approach. There's an initial ramp up stage. This will be for SIT participants. We want to make sure there's no restrictions there, which is why we've got that activity for all the LDSOs to have their systems qualified and in place, so that we can all energy suppliers have potential to migrate there without any geographic restriction. I've made a high level assumption that we'd have around about 5 million MPANs available from SIT, and as we reach the end of the replan and we see who's putting their names in the frame for SIT, that will be able to validate that assumption. After approximately 6 months, though, the first people coming through qualification will be available to start migrating, and that will be a period when we're seeing the most activity there and an increased volume of migration. We're assuming that sort of full scale can continue to around about 95% of MPANs migrated, and then with all good migrations, there'll be a tail there where potentially it becomes harder and harder to get the last few MPANs across. But all of those MPANs need migrating through to reach completion of the activity and the ability to transition over to the new settlement timelines, which we will talk about in a sec. So that's broadly approach there. Obviously, lots of assumptions behind that, and we're discussing those assumptions and validating them in the migration working group. If we just move on one more slide, then how does that look from a timescale perspective? And I think we've already partly covered this in the question that was asked earlier. But at the bottom there, you'll see that in April 2025, we've got the first people coming out of SIT MVC will be available to start migrating their meters, is the expectation. And as we go April, May, June through the 2025, we'll see other people coming through from the MVC and from SIT non-MVC. That's the path that gives you the ability, as Giles said earlier, to be able to migrate your MPANs and potentially offer new tariffs, etc. in the market. It also gives the energy suppliers there the longest timeline to complete the activity, going through to October 26. First people through qualification, though, will be able to migrate from end of September 25. And as we say, those tranches will come through over the end of 25, early 26, which will give us that 6 to 8 months at the end there for the very last people to go through and to migrate their meters. Target being that we completed that activity by the beginning of Q4 2026. What that then leaves is the transfer over to the new settlement timelines, and Jason's just going to say a few words on that.
Yeah, just very quickly to cover the bottom chevron, which is M16. M16 is the cut over to the new settlement timetable. In the last round 2 of the replan, that was set as a milestone 2 months after the end of migration. But we had a number of discussions with Alexon and Alexon Ops as to how we might approach this. And rather than being bound to a time when we cut over the settlement timetable, the approach we're going to take is we're going to set a set of criteria that are required to be met to cut over to the new settlement timetable. As Giles said at the beginning, those will be around the stability of the new MHHS arrangements, confidence that we can transfer to the faster settlement timetable. And so what we've put in round 3 now is we put a 6-month window in there to allow us time to meet those criteria in order to cut over to the new settlement timetable. And the reason why we've set a window is it allows us to start early if the arrangements are stable. But we've also set a backstop to say, look, we're not going to indeterminably run parallel systems and incur the costs for running parallel systems. We'll set that 6-month backstop, at which point we expect that we will cut over to the new settlement timetable. So that's the rationale and the reason for the change in approach and the change of dates for the M16 in round 3.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So as before, I'll just pause there before I take the final section to see if there's any questions on the migration approach. Doesn't look like it. So just wanted to pick up at the end here that in parallel with that migration and moving over to the new settlement timelines, there's some activities that we've banded under business and operational readiness. And I'm just probably going to highlight the first couple on here, which is that those participants, I've got something showing in front of mine. I don't know if that's on my screen or is that on everyone's?
I think it must be on Joe's laptop. It's gone.
Oh, there we go. So the first one there, service management. So all participants need their own service management model in place. For yourselves, energy suppliers, that would obviously cover your own systems. For central parties, they've got theirs there, and we're working with Alexon as to making sure that we've got that in place and a clear model and an ability to triage if need be any queries that come in from a service management perspective. And picking up on that triaging, I'm expecting into the second bullet there says during that transition and migration, particularly with reverse migration in place, we're expecting that we may need to enhance the level of service management there to enable that we make sure we don't get the MPAN stuck in the wrong place or inabilities to settle there. So that's an enhanced level of service management we'd assume there. This slide though is as per the implementation approach. So I'll probably just pause there and give ourselves a few minutes for questions before we wrap up, Giles.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. Are there any questions? We've covered quite a lot of ground going through each of the stages and phases of the plan, and I'm very conscious probably the last opportunity to really quite quickly solicit answers from across the team before certainly before sort of the SIT sort of request to respond to round 3 by Monday. And of course, you know, we've now only got another 2 weeks after the month before actually round 3 closes. So you know, we really welcome questions. So if there are any, excuse me, please do put your hand up. We have got time. Okay, I don't see any hands. I think it just remains for me to thank you for your attendance this afternoon. I know it's probably a significant portion out of your days, but we really welcome the time here and the questions that we've had. Probably just on the theme of questions, if you do have questions after this call, please do submit them. We really welcome them because actually it's a further sense check and validation for us that we've we've covered all the angles on the plan and made it as complete as we possibly can at this point. So please do submit them. Just to recap, the recording this afternoon will go up onto the collaboration website portal. As I said at the start as well, you will see a link in here to this recording. I'm afraid it won't work and you won't get access. So unfortunately, we'll need to wait until we publish that, but we will do that quickly. And if there are no further questions, I think we will close the call there. Thank you again for your time. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks.